Good evening there, everybody. What is happening? Hopefully, y'all are having a wonderful day today. So, when it comes down to it, I thought, of course, that I would talk about the up and coming great fight that'll be happening this weekend. And, of course, for those of you that are not aware, for us quote unquote fight fans or people overall, of course, that love the fight game, it's going to be a very big weekend for us. Because, of course, not only is there the return of Manny Pac-Man Pacquiao, I believe, on the PBC card against that of current welterweight champion Mario Barrios, someone that I've never really considered to be an A grade level fighter, but someone that is a competent B grade level fighter. And of course, Pacquiao is going to be coming back at the age of 46 years old, I believe, after about a 2 or 3 year layoff, which, in my view, of course, is more than likely not going to end up well for him. But I mean, we'll see what happens. And of course, on that card, there also is going to be the rematch of Tim Tszyu versus Sebastian Fundora. Unfortunately, I will not be able to get that card because not only am I going to be getting this card right here, but of course, I'm also going to be getting that of the UFC card where Dustin Poirier, I believe, will have his alleged final send off. Of course, with his fight against Max Holloway, that trilogy fight where, of course, Dustin Poirier has already beaten him on two separate occasions. But, we'll see where that goes. But, anyways, the big fight that, of course, I'm probably the most excited about and that a lot of people are probably the most excited about this weekend is probably the big heavyweight unification fight between that of Oleksandr Usyk, who, in my personal view right now, would be my number one pound for pound fighter. And of course, he's having the rematch against Daniel Dynamite Dubois, who, of course, in their first fight, Usyk pretty much ended up dominating and eventually getting the stoppage. But of course, you had a certain amount of people that were alleging that there was some controversy with Oleksandr Usyk and the quote unquote low blow or body shot. And of course, you have certain people that believe that Oleksandr Usyk should have been counted as knocked out. And that's that's kind of a faulty argument, but I mean we'll talk about that as the video goes along. But anyways, point being is that Oleksandr Usyk, of course, who right now in my view would be the number one pound for pound fighter, and pretty much is on almost every single list out there, and deservingly so in my personal view. He, of course, at the age of 38 years old, is going to try to become a 3 times undisputed champion. And I thought that I would give my final fight analysis, my final fight breakdowns, and my final fight prediction of the main event fight that's going to be happening here. And I may also give a little bit of an analysis also on that of the Holloway versus Dustin Poirier fight, as well also, on that of the Pacquiao Barrios and the Fundora and Tszyu rematch as well. But let's get into it. Let's see overall what the breakdown is. Or overall, I believe that this was a face-off on that of DAZN.com, the YouTube channel. Let's see what they both had to say.
Oleksandr Usyk, the undefeated, undisputed, two-time heavyweight champion of the world.
Daniel! Where is Daniel?
Some consider the GOAT.
One thing I'll say about Usyk is that this dude overall has a great personality. This guy actually, he comes across as very likable. He plays the mind games, but he's not someone that would really be looked at as abrasive. But at the same time, he's very unapologetic and confident, basically in his abilities. And that's someone, of course, that, you kind of have to admire, at least overall with what they do. Oleksandr Usyk, of course, all-time grade level fighter. And there's certain people overall that, of course, would debate that. In my personal view, if you're someone that just takes a look at it objectively and you don't have a racial motivation or if you don't have any bias, it's very obvious that Oleksandr Usyk, with what he's accomplished and his skill set, that he's an all-time great level fighter. It's really not even a conversation. I mean, just in my personal view, when you talk about Oleksandr Usyk, he at the very least is on the same level as certain other all-time great fighters such as Joe Calzaghe, Andre Ward, Bernard Hopkins, Canelo Alvarez, Terrence Bud Crawford. In my personal view, all those fighters that I just mentioned are somewhat on the same level. Tommy Hearns maybe. Although Tommy Hearns, in my view, if I'm going to be real with you, he's probably below every single one of those fighters that I just mentioned. It's no offense against Tommy Hearns, and I know a lot of people would disagree with me, but I mean, what big fights did Tommy Hearns really win that would have been considered as top 5 or top 10 pound for pound during his career if they were the same size as him? No offense against him. But there's a reason why he never beat Marvin Hagler or Sugar Ray Leonard or some of those other guys. Now, I do think that he beat Sugar Ray in the rematch where it was scored a draw, but still, it is what it is. And, of course, he beat Roberto Duran, but you were supposed to defeat Roberto Duran. Duran started off his career at 135. At a maximum, really should only been fighting at 147, and you were a guy that really was more of a middleweight fighter. You're a guy that's with a 78-inch arm reach and 6'1". You're not a welterweight dude. So, I mean, it is what it is. But that's why Tommy Hearns, although he is an all-time great level fighter, and he was the first 4-weight division champion, I believe, ever within that of boxing history, at least within modern boxing, he was someone that, in my personal view, he definitely was vastly overrated. But I mean, it is what it is. But anyway.
Of the heavyweight division. Daniel Dubois, the young power puncher with something to prove. They now meet again, July 19th, exclusively on DAZN. Before they meet in the ring, they meet here. This is Usyk versus Dubois. This is Face Off. Oleksandr Usyk, Daniel Dubois. We go again. Do you think you could be getting Oleksandr at a good time? He's had 2 hard 12-round fights with Tyson Fury. Obviously 38 now. Is this your time?
You could say that, but I don't want to even put it down to just him being an old man. I've got to prove myself and, bring chaos in the ring. What I bring and the force I have, that will be...
And of course, what Danny Dubois is basically stating is that he doesn't want any excuses if he ends up beating out of an Oleksandr Usyk. But the fact does remain that Oleksandr Usyk is 38 years old, and he is climbing, approaching that age of 39 years old. Now, what I will personally say about Usyk is this. I do still think that Usyk is at somewhat of a relative peak or prime form. You have this narrative that many people love to use, especially with fighters that they may like or may not like. They always go on this stuff about, overall, oh, this fighter was in their prime, this fighter wasn't in their prime, all this sort of stuff. Well, to me, you can be a little bit older in age and still be within your prime years. Artur Beterbiev, at 38 or 39 years old, still was looked at within somewhat of his prime years. Now, if you want to claim right now that he slowed down a little bit, you can. But, I mean, he's still pretty, other than Dimitri Bivol, he's pretty much beating up any other A-grade level fighters that he's fought, that are severely younger than him. So, I mean, it's like, just because a fighter is a little bit older doesn't always necessarily mean, once again, that they're not at a prime form. Many people, of course, love to use the narrative that Floyd Mayweather was a quote-unquote grandpa when he fought Canelo. No, he wasn't. He was 36 years old, but he was at the pinnacle and at the peak of his career. But that probably was the final fight where he was at the peak of his career. As for Oleksandr Usyk, I'm not really quite sure if he's still at the pinnacle of his career, but he, has been within the past few years. So, I mean, I assume that more than likely he's going to be at a prime or peak form, but we'll see what ends up happening. But I always like to state that because, once again, people always love to go on this narrative about a fighter who's quote-unquote washed up, but they only use this whenever they want to, overall degrade the level of wins. Like when Fury beat Klitschko, for example. No, Klitschko was now washed up. He was older for sure. He was now washed up. Bernard Hopkins, when he lost to Joe Calzaghe, although he definitely was older, was still looked at a peak or pinnacle point in his career. Now, certain people, of course, will state the man was 43 years old. How can you state that? Right. But he beat other pound-for-pound level fighters, such as Winky Wright, such as that of Antonio Tarver, and also that of Kelly Pavlik. The only man that he really couldn't beat around that time and that stretch was that of Joe Calzaghe. All right, so once again, Joe Calzaghe, in my view, one of the most underrated fighters of all time. Not the greatest of resumes ever, of course, but in my view, when he beat Bernard Hopkins, it was at a relative peak, or at least a prime version. If you don't want to state that it was at the absolute pinnacle, you can claim overall that he at least was at a quote-unquote prime version of himself. Although, of course, that would be very, very rare for a fighter in his 40s. But anyways, let's continue.
What's needed, really. But I stand more to gain. He's at the end of his career. I stand more to gain from a win. Yeah, getting all the belts, that means, that's the start for me, really.
You definitely do overall gain more from a win, and not only do you gain more from a win, but on top of that, so does the British Boxing Board, and so overall does boxing in general. Because European fighters, overall, whatever narratives people like to put out there, boxing knows where its bread is buttered. They don't usually like the Caucasian European fighters or the Caucasoid, European fighters up on top for long, because they're not someone that usually is someone that they can brand out to the masses. Now, there are certain fighters that are quote-unquote, Caucasoid that they have promoted, somewhat, maybe like a Lomachenko, but even he didn't last for long because he was never overall going to be promoted over certain guys like a Teofimo Lopez or a Devin Haney, because Black American fighters and Latino fighters are usually the ones that make the biggest amount of fights. Now, every once in a while, you may have a Caucasoid fighter from America or Britain, of course, that, is a very decent star, like that of a Tyson Fury or like that of a Rocky Marciano or something like that, or a Joe Calzaghe, but Other than that, they don't want a lot of these European fighters up there for long. Just like they don't want a lot of the Cuban fighters, or they don't want overall a lot of the Argentine fighters up there for long, or the Kazakhstan fighters. You have to come from one of those main areas to where you know how to brand them. And it's very difficult to brand certain fighters from the Ukraine or Russia because, first of all, they don't usually speak English all that well. And on top of that, they're not usually that popular within America or the main places where boxing may be super popular. But I think Usyk has somewhat found his niche, especially after defeating AJ Anthony Joshua and Tyson Fury. Those are probably two of the biggest wins that you can get in your career in order to really grow your brand.
What are your memories of the first fight with Daniel?
My winner.
Yeah?
And I think that Oleksandr Usyk is kind of playing mind games a little bit with Danny Dubois because, of course, Danny Dubois' corner, they mentioned about that quote-unquote low blow, or really should have been a knockout punch, all that bullshit. And let me state this very quickly. That punch that Danny Dubois landed, yes, it was low. Not only was it on the whole entire belt line, but it was on also the top part of the bottom part of the shorts. So yes, it was a little bit low. If you're not only landing on the entire belt line, but a little bit of the bottom part of the shorts, that's a low blow. I'm sorry, but it is what it is. And that's why you see certain referees, when you take a look at it, sometimes they'll point to the trunks and say, they'll point overall to the bottom half of the belt line and they say this or any point below this is low. So anyone claiming, of course, that Oleksandr Usyk should have been knocked out in the first fight, all that sort of bullshit. First of all, they have no idea what the hell they're talking about. Or B, they could be someone like a Dante's Box Nation or Aki TV that, of course, usually has a racial motivation because, let's be real, they just want a black fighter to be the number one pound for pound. Now, of course, there are other channels that have racial motivations as well. Don't get it twisted. But the reason why I mention those is because this conversation is about Oleksandr Usyk. So anything you hear from Aki TV or Dante or some of those other guys, Bruce M.F. Vane or some of these other guys, you can't trust anything they say because they're always going to have a racial motivation. So nothing they say can be trusted. But anyway.
Did anything?
And once again, not to interrupt this, but let me make one final point before this continues. For anyone overall that may retort and say that Usyk overall should have been knocked out, how do we know that? Overall, if Oleksandr Usyk knew that it was called as a low blow and the referee didn't start counting, how do we know that Oleksandr Usyk would have not got back up? How do you personally know that? So it's like, because to me, Usyk overall, he looked very hurt, but he didn't look like a guy that in my view was going to be counted out. Just my personal perspective of it. So, even if you want to claim that Usyk cheated, you blame the referee in that. And to be honest with you, it was low. So, I mean, it is what it is.
Surprise you about Daniel?
No. It's a boxing. Boxing don't have surprise.
Yeah. How do you approach this fight differently this time?
Confidence, I'm ready to seize victory.
Is it about throwing the kitchen sink?
It's about getting victory, seriously, I've worked hard for it and now I want to cause chaos in the ring and restore it with order, with victory. So that's my that's my mindset.
What was it like sharing the ring?
Danny Dubois keeps saying overall that he's going to cause chaos in the ring and restore victory. What that basically tells me is that Danny Dubois is going to try really, really hard to attack the body of Oleksandr Usyk and that he's going to try very early on and early, to really try and ruffle up Usyk's feathers. But I expect that Usyk more than likely is going to expect this. Do I think that it's going to work? You never know. Usyk is someone that has shown in the past that, a little bit of pressure maybe can set him off balance just by a little bit. But he's also someone that shows that he pretty much can adjust to any type of style. Whether you pressure him, whether you fight on the back foot. Now, I do think that Usyk, of course, likes to mainly fight within that of the mid-range and likes to pressure his opponents. So, I mean, of course, the main style that probably would throw him off is if you really, try to pressure him, that much. But, I mean, Usyk even adjusts to that. And he is someone overall that can fight very good on the back foot as well. He has a very good, dipping down overhand left. He has a very good jab over the top. He has one of the best jabs and one of the best lead hands I've ever seen.
With Usyk, everyone calling Oleksandr a master. What was it like sharing a ring with a master?
Look, I've come on since then. I've resurrected myself, so.
There goes AJ Anthony Joshua throwing that uppercut from right field. Anyone who knows anything about boxing or anyone who's sparred or actually been coached by anyone that's actually fought before, you never lead with an uppercut from that far out. And that's the exact reason why. You're also never supposed to lead with a wide open hook.
I feel, just ready for a new beginning. Really, I'm ready for a great fight. Looking forward to a great fight, and yeah, I'm excited for it.
Same question I asked Alexander. Did anything surprise you about him?
No, to be honest, really, no.
No. The power. Everybody talks about the power of Daniel Dubois. The biggest puncher you've been in the ring with?
I think no.
No.
And just to talk about who the quote-unquote biggest puncher is, I'm not quite sure who Oleksandr Usyk would state. Maybe he would state Tyson Fury. Maybe he would state AJ Anthony Joshua. Maybe he would state someone even like a Murat Gassiev or a Derek Chisora. I don't really know. But what I will personally state is that the hardest puncher that I think that Usyk has ever been in the ring with is that of an AJ Anthony Joshua, if I more than likely had to guess. But Oleksandr Usyk has been in there with a multitude of great hitters. Daniel Dubois, AJ, Tyson Fury, Murat Gassiev, Mars Bredas, all those guys can punch. So Usyk definitely is someone that, he usually handles a great all-around game. Now, what I will personally overall state is that he will have to watch out for the power here. But let me also bring up another point, because this is another point that people also say. They say that when Usyk ended up defeating that of an AJ Anthony Joshua, that AJ wasn't the same, and all that is bullshit. It's just that AJ has the perfect type of style for Usyk to counter. Someone that is a little bit too straight up and down, someone that, is not, overall super quick, someone that, is going to try to outbox him, but someone that really cannot outbox someone as quick or as agile as that of an Oleksandr Usyk and as defensively sound. It just is what it is. And then on top of that, Usyk can hurt him to a degree. So he really was the perfect type of style in 2020 hindsight to beat that of an AJ Anthony Joshua. And I just don't see it being much of a difference with that of Daniel Dubois. Unless we're talking about just raw natural size and age and power, there's just not really anything else that Daniel Dubois has over Usyk. That's really about the only factors he has. He doesn't have agility. He doesn't have speed. He doesn't have boxing IQ. He doesn't have the counters, in my personal view. He doesn't have the movement. He doesn't have the footwork. There's nothing else that he has over Oleksandr Usyk unless we're talking about age, power, and that's really about it, and size. That's really about it.
Who was the biggest puncher?
I think it's Derek.
Really?
Yeah. Crazy.
Chisora punches harder than Daniel.
Crazy Derek, yeah.
I had a feeling he'd say Derek Chisora, but the reason why is because Derek Chisora, ended up overall hitting him, probably more times than any of those other fighters did. Sometimes it's a harder fight to fight that type of style. Derek Chisora, Sean Porter, those guys are what are known as quote-unquote truth machine fighters. Joe Frazier, guys that aren't always as skilled as other guys, but guys that are always going to come at you with everything that they have. They're also extremely awkward. So those guys end up hitting you sometimes a little bit more, than what some other fighters do. Now, do I think that Chisora hits harder than that of an AJ Anthony Joshua? No. But I do think that Derek Chisora more than likely hit Usyk more flat times flush than what an AJ Anthony Joshua did. But I could be wrong about that.
Was you surprised when Daniel didn't get to his feet when you hit him with that jab?
No.
There was a lot of controversy after that first fight with the shot that landed. Obviously, Daniel didn't rise, didn't get to his feet. Were you surprised?
Well, there was only controversy by pretty much three people. Either A, people who have no idea what the fuck they're talking about in boxing. B, people who had a racial motivation that didn't want Usyk to be the number one pound-for-pound fighter, like that of a Bruce M.F. Vane or Dante's Boxing Nation or Aki TV. Or 3, British boxing fans. Those pretty much were the only 3 groups that really said it was quote-unquote controversial. For anyone that really knows anything about boxing, we all know that that was not a controversial call, and it really was the right call.
Daniel didn't get to his feet before the 10 count.
No. It's no surprise for me. Because my jab was hard.
Was it a hard jab?
I don't want to even go there. We're talking about that's past and gone. Because I don't know what you're trying to... I know what you're doing your job, but I'm looking for causing chaos in the ring on Saturday, and that's my whole...
Daniel Dubois comes across to me as someone that is a little bit shaken up for this fight. And I think that he's done a lot of shit to where he looks himself in the mirror and is trying to speak something into existence. And sometimes speaking something into an existence, even if you don't fully believe it, sometimes it can be successful. And I think the way that Danny Dubois looks at it is that, he's going to try to not to think of the first fight, which is probably the best thing to do in my personal view. Now, of course, it's proper to make adjustments, but you don't want to get into your own mindset too much, in terms of thinking about the knockout. But that tells me that Danny Dubois, that he knows that he has a very, very big challenge on his hands. And I think that he's a little bit mentally shaken up about that of an Oleksandr Usyk. There's no doubt about it in my mind. Just take a look at the energy overall that he has. It just is what it is. Danny Dubois, it's very obvious that he knows that he's in there with a boxing master. And there's only so much sometimes that you can do against someone that's a boxing master. Unless, once again, I just see Oleksandr Usyk age completely overnight, which I'd more than likely be able to tell, if it happened in this fight. I just don't see how he beats him. Like I said, there's almost nothing that he beats Oleksandr Usyk in. He's not someone that's as quick as Usyk. He's someone that is a little bit too hittable. He's not a super defensively sound fighter. He's someone overall that doesn't have the worst feet in the world, but he doesn't have the quickest feet in the world either. He's a very, very good heavyweight fighter. He's an A-grade level heavyweight fighter, but Usyk is someone that is one of the greatest fighters that I've ever seen. And there's just very little that you can do over certain fighters like that, especially the ones that know how to handle that size.
Game.
And the size disadvantage that many people would think that Usyk, of course, has, at times it can even be an advantage, kind of like what Mike Tyson or Manny Pacquiao were able to do in their career, or Canelo, if you make yourself a very hard target to hit. Because if you're fast and then on top of that you're very defensively responsible and you're able to counter, with very good consequences, overall make them pay, then, that basically makes your opponent lose a whole lot of confidence. Because they're like, wow, this dude is really fast. I can't hit this dude, and he can basically hit me anytime that he wants. And on top of that, I'm starting to get tired because I'm starting to miss a lot of my shots.
All right.
Priority.
Your form has been brilliant of late. What do you put that down to?
Hunger and desire, and just as you're a fighter, you want to become the best. So that and the team I have around me, my dad, and that circle, inner circle, kept me strong, and here I am today.
Do you look at that first fight and think, I'm a completely different animal now?
Yeah, I've moved past. I'm resurrected myself, and I feel like a ready fighter, ready for anyone in the.
Let me also state this, because there's always much debate about whether a fighter is a completely different animal or, if they're the same fighter. Of course, we hear it all the time, with the debate about Canelo Alvarez and Floyd Mayweather. We hear many people claim that Canelo Alvarez was quote-unquote too green or not really that great of a fighter when he fought Floyd. And then we hear the other side of the coin where people say that Canelo is the exact same fighter today as what he was when he fought Floyd. And I think that the truth is somewhere in the middle. I think that Canelo definitely, at least, became greater later on in his career and became, definitely a different level of fighter. Someone that was not at his absolute peak when he fought Mayweather, but still was in his prime years, and then later on he would hit his peak probably at around, 31, 32, 33 years old. Probably around those Gennady Golovkin fights, and Danny Jacobs fights. That was probably the best version of Canelo Alvarez that I had ever seen, at least in the rematch against Golovkin, and of course that one fight against Danny Jacobs, then Callum Smith, Caleb Plant, those guys, that was the best version of Canelo that I personally had ever seen. So the thing is that the truth can somewhat lie within the middle. Now, as for Danny Dubois, do I think that he's, changed, some of his skills or become a more skilled fighter over time as what a Canelo has? Not really. I think that he pretty much has around the same skill set, but that being stated, he does have more confidence. He is someone that is more experienced. So to say that Danny Dubois is just a completely, that he's the same fighter, I'm not going to completely state that, because he does have confidence, and sometimes confidence can be the key to winning a fight, even if you're not as skilled as your opponent. So, we'll see what ends up happening here. But I would have to say that Danny Dubois definitely is a little bit of a different monster. I'm not going to say that he's a completely different animal, for this fight. But, he definitely is coming in here a little bit different with a different mentality. He's someone overall, of course, that has gotten, I believe, 3 stoppage victories within his last 3 fights over some notable names. Gerald Big Baby Miller, Filip Pergovic, and, of course, AJ Anthony Joshua. Now, I thought AJ was, pretty much done, by the time he fought him. But, it is what it is. But anyways, that being stated, overall, they still were 3 important names. And it's 3 mantles that he now has on his wall. So, of course, Danny Dubois, when it comes down to it, it's going to be very interesting to see what ends up happening. But I do think that Danny Dubois, that in terms of his skill set, I just don't think that really much, if anything, has really improved. Whereas other fighters, when you take a look at their career, people, of course, would debate that when Lomachenko lost or Canelo lost overall, that they're still the same fighter that they were many years later, or that Jermell Charlo, that he was the same fighter. The thing is that you can tell when a fighter has improved over time. And when I take a look at Daniel Dubois, he's not someone that comes across to me as someone that made any massive improvements. But I do think that he fought 3 styles of fighter that was very good for his style. I just think that Usyk is the wrong type of style for him. That being stated, do I think he's the exact same fighter? No. I think he's made some slight improvements, and I think that, of course, he definitely has gotten 3 victories, which will be a key factor to his confidence leading within this fight. That being stated, do I think it'll be enough to beat that of Oleksandr Usyk? No.
Well, the shot that was called low. If the referee had started counting, would you
Now let's rewind this punch overall very quickly.
have got to your feet? The shot that was called low. If the referee had started counting.
Once again, when you take a look at that, not only is it on the whole belt line, but as you can see on the lower part of the gloves, it is on the bottom part of the shorts, and a good portion of it is on the bottom parts of the shorts. And that was when he pushed his trunks up with that punch. So at the first point, he probably landed even lower than that overall on originally. So once again, yes, it was a low blow.
Would you have got to your feet?
Yes, of course. I wake up. Hungry.
I agree.
Which was hard because my bow say me, "Hey, Alex, whoa." So it was pain, but it's not like a body. It's.
And let me give Oleksandr Usyk a great amount of credit because he actually adjusted to that shot, which has always been a little bit of a weakness within his arsenal to avoid that uppercut to the body. He still gets hit with it here and there, but he turns overall. He's starting to turn with it a little bit better, and I've seen that in the Tyson Fury fight. That's one of the ways overall that you can avoid a body shot. Either you can crunch up, sometimes turn overall with the punch, and of course have your elbow or your forearm block that punch. But of course you got to be very careful with that you're not opening up to a liver shot.
X. It's different.
Well, I've heard Don Charles, your coach, say that he believes that Alexander conned the ref and the boxing.
Yeah, don't even go there.
No,
Don't even go.
No.
No. This is today. This is now. I'm going to enjoy this fight. I want to enjoy this fight, so we'll see.
How do you stop Daniel from enjoying it?
It was wonderful. Я кажу, це буде неймовірно.
Your performance will be wonderful.
Yeah.
Are you still very hungry?
Yeah, I continue feel I hungry for boxing. Training not training too, but my training I prepare for this fight 23 years. All my life, but boxing is like oxygen for me.
For those of you also that aren't aware, Oleksandr Usyk, I believe, ended up starting boxing a little bit later on within his life. Now, he's not someone overall that started as late as someone like an AJ or a Wilder, I believe, who started at the ages of 19 or something like that, or Sergio Martinez, who started at the age of 19 or somewhere around there. I believe that he started at age 15. But it's still somewhat late, compared to a lot of other fighters. But I believe that his original plan actually was to play football or, of course, soccer over there in Europe. But, of course, I think eventually he was taken in, to the amateur program. And eventually, he ended up either falling in love with boxing or just realizing overall that he was excessively talented at it. And there are a certain amount of fighters actually that became that way. Deontay Wilder, Evander Holyfield, where their first, goal was football. But of course, American football, especially I believe for the Crimson Tide, the Alabama Roll Tide, I believe, because I believe both Holyfield and Deontay Wilder are both from there, But anyways, point being is that a lot of great athletes, within that of boxing, believe it or not, it was not really their first original plan.
Just being more aggressive this time, being more offensive, letting the hands go, being dominant on the front foot. Is that how you plan on tackling this fight?
Yeah.
And I have no doubt about that. Daniel Dubois is going to be coming towards that of an Oleksandr Usyk. Pause. But I mean, overall thing is that Danny Dubois, he is going to be going forward to Oleksandr Usyk. It might be very early, and Usyk is going to have to weather that storm. He's going to have his counters ready. His movement, that lead hand, hit Danny Dubois with something very early on the show that he's not going to be bullied. So we'll see what happens. Do I believe that he'll be massively successful? No, personally, I don't, because I think that Danny Dubois, I think that he is going to be a little bit, kind of shocked a little bit in the ring. When I say shocked, I'm not talking about, necessarily being hit with something unexpected, but I do think overall that, he is going to be a little bit starstruck in there. Because Danny Dubois, you can tell that first fight still affects him to that degree. And I think that Danny Dubois was really starting to turn around his career at the time that Oleksandr Usyk had defeated him. And then, of course, the results showed the 3 fights after that. But there's just not much I see in terms of a difference of Danny Dubois from 22 months ago than what I do today. He's still a very formidable force, but he's not someone, in my view, that'll beat Oleksandr Usyk.
And are you prepared for anything that Daniel brings your way?
Yes, of course. Listen, it's a young guy. This guy wanna take my belts. I not wanna give my belts.
If you win this fight Saturday night, will we see you in the ring again?
Oh, not if, when.
When?
Yeah.
Oleksandr Usyk apparently stated overall that he only has about 2 or 3 fights left. Now, apparently his plans have been that, he stated that he wants to fight Tyson Fury in a trilogy. I mean, personally, I don't really need to see that fight again. I thought that Usyk, clearly won both fights about 8 rounds to 4, maybe 7 rounds to 5 in the first one if you wanted to be generous. But I mean, Oleksandr Usyk already beat Tyson Fury. I don't need to see him overall fight those guys again. But the guys that I would really love to see him fight would be Joseph Parker, maybe an Ajit Caballel, or someone like an Andrew Ruiz. I would love to see any one of those fights. And I'm sure that there's a multitude of other fights that I'm not even thinking of. You have Moses, Itama, I believe, or Itama, however you pronounce his name, but I just don't know if that fight's going to happen in time. He just doesn't have any big wins as of yet in his career. Although, of course, he will be facing Dillian White here in a couple of weeks, I believe. And of course, he is extremely talented. But I just don't see Usyk being severely interested in that fight as of yet because he just doesn't have a big enough name. And on top of that, he's someone that would be a very big threat for not being a big name. So I just don't see that fight happening.
And what would it mean to be the first British 4-belt undisputed heavyweight champion of the world?
The best of my era.
Right, Alexander, tell Daniel how you beat him on Saturday night.
We will see it on Saturday.
Yeah?
Yeah.
A masterclass?
Of course.
Same for you, Daniel.
Chaos.
Does this fight go the distance, in your opinion?
It's chaos.
For as long as it lasts?
Yeah.
But anyways, that pretty much is about it for this video. But anyways, as for my fight prediction, who do I believe will win? I do believe that Oleksandr Usyk more than likely will get the victory. I just think that he's going to have too much. Now, that being stated, Danny Dubois, I do assume that he will win a couple of the first rounds. And the reason why I state that is because I do think he is going to try to come out and really hurt Oleksandr Usyk. And I think that Usyk may take a few rounds to adjust to that type of style. But I think after a while, Usyk's movement, his stamina, his feints, his ability, I think eventually it's going to get to him. Because there's only so much that you can really do with an Oleksandr Usyk. He's just an all-time grade level fighter. Now, would I be shocked if Danny Dubois ended up winning the fight? I wouldn't be shocked, especially considering that Usyk is 38 years old, going on 39, and I don't really know how he's going to look, after a certain amount of time off. I think he fought earlier this year, against Tyson Fury, but, still, I think it's been about 6 or 7 months. If I'm wrong about that, someone correct me. But anyways, thing is that this is going to be a very interesting fight. Danny Dubois is going to try, and really throw Oleksandr Usyk off balance. And we'll see, because Usyk has shown in the past that he may have a little bit of problems with someone that really tries to pressure him the whole entire fight. But Oleksandr Usyk has also shown that he's adjusted to that type of style. So we'll see overall what ends up happening. It's going to be very, very, very particularly interesting. But I'm going to say that Oleksandr Usyk wins this fight. And I'm going to say that more than likely he wins this by stoppage within that of 8 to 10 rounds. I think that Danny Dubois will have some early success. I think eventually that Usyk will overall, eventually find success of his own. And I think that once he finds success, that Danny Dubois, I'm not going to say that he's going to quit, but he will start to mentally check out. I'm not going to go too hard on Danny Dubois because, of course, he had a narrative against him for a long time, and somewhat deservingly so, that he's a quitter. Because, of course, he did quit against Joyce, I believe. Now, of course, that was over a broken orbital eye bone, so I'm not going to go after the kid that hard for that. And, of course, he did end up quitting against Usyk. But that's another part of the reason why I believe that Usyk will win. I think that he has the complete mental edge. I think he's someone that once he starts to have success, he will start to mentally wear in Danny Dubois. And you can tell that first fight that, Dubois still has not gotten over the demons of that first fight. That he realizes that Usyk is on a whole nother level compared to those guys that he recently beat. So it's going to be very particularly interesting. And I think once Usyk starts hurting Dubois and hitting him with certain punches, I do think that eventually it'll only be a matter of time before Danny Dubois mentally and physically checks out. But we'll see what ends up happening. I could be wrong, but we'll see. But I have Oleksandr Usyk winning by stoppage, I believe, than that of the latter rounds. As for Manny Pacquiao versus Mario Barrios, if I don't do another breakdown, I'm going to assume that Mario Barrios wins the fight either by decision or by stoppage, because I think Pacquiao, the last time I seen him, he just had no legs whatsoever against Yordenis Ugas. He also was someone that is 46 years old and had been out for, I believe, about 2 or 3 years. I don't think that that's a good equation in order to beat someone like a Barrios. Now, of course, if Pacquiao was still at a great point in his career, of course I'd pick Pacquiao, because I don't think Mario Barrios is that exceptionally talented. But Pacquiao is just someone that really does not belong in the boxing ring anymore. So it is what it is. As for Tim Tszyu versus that of Sebastian Fundora in the rematch, that's going to be a very interesting match. I'm going to slightly go with that of Tim Tszyu because I think that he's the better all-around boxer. But Sebastian Fundora definitely does have his height and his reach. And that being stated, they both fought each other on short notice. So they're both going to have a full camp for training for each other this time. But I do think that Tim Tszyu's boxing ability will help him out better this time. I do think overall that he has the better counter-punching ability. And I think that he'll be able to move out of the way of the punches better and easier this time around. Now that, hopefully, assuming that he doesn't get a massive cut over his forehead, I believe, which affected him very obviously, in that first fight. So we'll see. But I'm going to predict Tim Tszyu by that of unanimous decision or by decision or majority decision. I'm going to predict Mario Barrios by decision. And I'm going to predict Oleksandr Usyk by that of stoppage. So we'll see what ends up happening. But anyways, that pretty much is about it for today. Thank you all so much for watching. And I'll talk to you all later. But I have Oleksandr Usyk. We'll see what ends up happening. But I think that he's going to be a little bit too technical. I think that he just has too many advantages. Someone that really is the perfect type of style to beat Danny Dubois. And even if Dubois does come out pressuring, I don't know how long that's really going to last. Because Dubois is not someone that comes across to me as someone that is going to be able to compete with Usyk's stamina and work rate throughout a whole 12 rounds. But like I stated, I could be wrong about that. We'll just have to see. But I think Usyk's going to be a little bit too slick, a little bit too fast, and just a little bit too smart and agile and good for that of a Danny Dubois. But we'll see. But that pretty much is about it for today. Thank you all so much for watching. I have Oleksandr Usyk. We'll see who wins.